and a lot of kids. Evan and Brian are the younger of the two, from the Eva Julia Reiss and Kenneth Bevert marriage. And that's really, they said keep it short, so I did. They were hardworking. My grandmother was born 6 months before the World's Fair. She was born on January 5th, 1904, Jessie Marie Reiss, and she had a little glass favor. She loved to tell the story about the fair, even though she was only 6 months old. She'd heard it so much. And she, when I was in the 8th grade, my dad passed on to me a silver dollar from 1904, and I now think that it was from Charles Sr. from the bank. That was their way of saving. They were very thrifty. Saving was a way of life. And Linda remembers too, we went to the bank and put in our little deposit of $2 every week, and it was handwritten. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dale.
I'd like to mention that between Adam Reiss and Margaret and the Dentelmans, those two couples, I believe, had about 65 grandchildren. And that's one reason we're all here today. The next marriage is really my grandmother, also Margaret Reiss Dentelman. I would imagine she spent a lot of time on the farm. George Dentelman, my grandfather, had actually inherited from his father, Conrad, 2 farms. One is about a quarter mile down the road here, and another farm is, I think, a little closer to Paderborn, before they moved into the Five Parks, New Athens area. So I imagine George and Margaret also spent a lot of time together at church, Grange meetings. And to represent that line, I'd like to introduce Judith Peters, Judith Dentelman Peters, who is a granddaughter.
Dale asked me to share some reminiscence that I have of my grandmother. Well, I did not know her. She passed on before my parents were married. I got to thinking about this. And suddenly, one day, I began remembering this experience that my dad related. And he had quite an infectious smile. And the more he told this story, the more he grinned and laughed. And so I will ask you to kind of remember as this is going on. The story is about how he and his brother, Dale's dad, were in the kitchen, and his mother was baking a cake in their new gas oven. But she kept checking on it. And her son George did not want her to keep opening the oven. He wanted to convince her she didn't have to. And my dad related how he finally got the kitchen chair and sat in front of the oven so she couldn't open it up. Well, he just grinned from ear to ear about this. And I kind of got to thinking about that, and I thought, well, I wonder why she kept wanting to open up the oven. So I went to my mother and I asked, I said, well, why did she keep wanting to open the oven? And my mother answered that she was used to baking in a wood oven, which of course had no temperature control. And this was all this new novelty of that time. It must have been, I'm assuming, in the late 20s that this came to be, maybe the early 30s. And so after I thought about this experience, I began, whatever possessed my dad to happen to tell that experience? And then I got to remember my experience with my own dad when we must have been down at the Belleville Fairgrounds on what I would call a home show. And I remember in the center of the area on a raised platform, there were this couple introducing a microwave oven. My dad was totally enamored with this. And he talked about this periodically, and I assure you that we had one of the first microwave ovens. And we have some very cute little stories about that I'm sure that maybe you do too, and can share with your generation along with your first cell phones or fax machines or computers or whatever. So we have a lot of history we need to share too. And I'd like to add the final thing, that I'm wearing the earrings that my grandmother wore on her wedding day. They were given to her by her husband-to-be, and I'm also wearing the locket. And when I was married, why I'm getting so emotional. Excuse me. I wore my grandmother's wedding dress, and I wore the locket and earrings. And Cyrilla McCall, excuse me, she is in the picture of this wedding, and a scene with the family at the family farm in the swing in the back. And she remarked to me that she attended all 3 weddings because my mother also wore the locket. So it's just a little something interesting.
Okay, I had mentioned we had Eva Dillman and her 2 brothers, Conrad. Another brother is Heinrich. Down through that line, there is a gentleman by the name of Dale Dintelman. I'm the other Dale. This Dale lives in Belleville. He's part of the group that owns the Dillman Nursery on 158. He married Gina, and I don't know if Gina's mother is here today to talk. If not, I'd like to introduce Bob Dillman, who is the uncle of Dale Dillman. Bob, if you just stand briefly. Yes. If you have any comments about Dale and Gina.
Well, Geraldine Taki was who Dale, my nephew, married. And I don't know how how the Takis connect back to the Reisses, but I know that they do. Yeah. And they lived on past Eckert's on Rock 15, and her dad was did some truck farming there, and nice family.
Super.
Geraldine Taki.
I believe they've been married about 19 years and have one teenage girl. And they quite a bit of graduation ceremonies. That's 3 marriages. The 4th marriage I'm working on. Yet another gentleman, brother John, in his obituary, 1907. One of his daughters was written into that obituary as Mrs. Edward Reiss. So I'm working through that to see if it's correct or anything else. I want to mention a marriage that didn't happen.
And it becomes wallpaper, a vertical couple breaker strips. in your heritage room or basement room or whatever. Okay, I think our last speaker, unless I missed somebody, is my brother Ken, who's got 6 million photographs that'll take till tomorrow noon to see them all. Let me also add,
you younger people, Stephanie, Tom, I want you to populate these files with descendants.
While the picture is being taken.
A piece of wood.
My family tree is full of nuts. Okay, so we'll gather outside in another 10 minutes.
Really? This door. Nice door. Great. Big trip.